Malcolm. Excuse me, ma'am. Could I get a glass of water? Linda barely glances at him. A slow, exaggerated blink. Then, without a word, she turns on her heel and moves down the aisle. Malcolm watches as she stops at the next row, offering a warm smile and a tray of refreshments to a middle-aged couple. Then the next, and the next. Every first-class passenger is met with polite attentiveness. Everyone except him. His mouth feels dry, but not from thirst anymore. He shifts in his seat, trying to ignore the burning in his chest. Maybe she didn't hear him. Maybe he imagined the way her eyes had flickered with something dismissive. But then he sees it. A subtle glance in his direction. A smirk. Then nothing. She knew exactly what she was doing. Minutes pass. The ice in glasses clinks. Laughter hums around him, but no water, no acknowledgement. Malcolm's fingers tap restlessly on the armrest. He notices how Linda moves effortlessly through the cabin, her smile never faltering, except when she reaches his row. That's when the smile tightens, her eyes skimming past him as if he were invisible. The message is clear. He doesn't belong. At least, not in her eyes. Malcolm glances at the other passengers, looking for some kind of recognition, some signal that someone else notices. But all he finds is avoidance. The silence is louder than any words could be. Malcolm. Excuse me. I believe I asked for some water earlier. Linda stops. She turns just enough for her smirk to be visible. Linda. Oh, sir, I think you're in the wrong section. This isn't an economy. The words hang in the air like a slap. A few heads turn. The businessman across the aisle shifts uncomfortably. A woman in the next row stiffens but doesn't speak. Malcolm exhales, slow and steady. Malcolm, I know exactly where I am. Linda tilts her head, pretending to process his words. Linda, are you sure? A chuckle escapes from somewhere behind him. Malcolm's grip tightens on the armrest. He's been here before. But this time, he's not backing down. The weight of watching eyes presses against him. The low murmurs of passengers ripple through the cabin. Yet, no one speaks. A man clears his throat. A woman shifts in her seat. But the silence remains. Malcolm scans the faces around him. Some look away. Others stare at their hands, their screens, their drinks, anything but him. No one wants to get involved. It's easier that way. Linda, emboldened by the lack of resistance, folds her arms, her smirk deepening. The moment stretches, uncomfortable and suffocating. Malcolm sees it in their eyes. They know. They just don't care enough to act. Malcolm, I paid for this seat just like everyone else here. Linda sighs, her amusement shifting into feigned irritation. Linda, and I highly doubt that. The words are sharp, calculated, designed to cut. Malcolm reaches into his pocket, fingers brushing against his boarding pass. But before he can produce it, Linda, sir, if you don't calm down, I'll have to call security when we land. A collective inhale from the cabin. A loaded warning. Malcolm's jaw tightens. He hears the shift in her tone, the way she plays the part of the concerned flight attendant, framing him as the aggressor. She wants him to react. She wants him to give her an excuse. He won't. But that doesn't mean he's staying silent. Malcolm inhales deeply, the taste of restraint bitter on his tongue. He's been here before. The same script, different setting. The unspoken rules of being a black man in a white space. Don't push too hard. Don't raise your voice. Don't make them uncomfortable, but this time, he won't let it slide. Malcolm stared at the equation on the board, his pencil tapping against the desk. He knew the answer. He always did. But the hesitation was there, heavy and familiar. Teacher, anyone? A pause, then a sigh. Teacher, Malcolm. All eyes turned, some expectant, others are doubtful. He swallowed the frustration. Malcolm, X equals 12. A flicker of surprise crossed the teacher's face before she nodded. Teacher, that's correct. The murmurs started. Not praise, but whispers. Did he cheat? Must be a fluke. Malcolm clenched his jaw. He was the only black student in the room, but he refused to let that define him. Malcolm. One more try. His hands ached from writing, his eyes burned from reading, but he pressed on. Late nights in the library, early mornings before class. Every grade, every award, a statement. I belong. Classmates whispered, some mocked, some envied, but none of them knew the weight he carried. Professor. Outstanding work, Mr. Hayes. Full marks. Scholarships came. MIT, Oxford. But success didn't erase the stares, the skepticism. Security, guard, hesitant. ID, please. Even when he wore the same suit, carried the same briefcase, walked the same halls as his peers. It never changed, but neither did he. He kept going. News anchor. Revolutionary, life-saving. Dr. Malcolm Hayes has transformed modern medicine. Applause filled the conference hall, flashing cameras, reporters scrambling. His breakthrough, a cure for a rare disease, had saved thousands. The Nobel Prize followed. Prestige, recognition. But so did the questions. Interviewer. Dr. Hayes, do you think your background played a role in your success? Malcolm's smile tightened. Background. He knew what they meant. As if his achievements needed an explanation beyond skill and perseverance. At the gala that night, a waiter handed him a tray. Waiter. The executives will be seated soon. Mistakes for staff. Again. The title changed, the respect didn't. The hum of the plane, the rustle of boarding passes. Malcolm adjusted his seatbelt. The memory of the Nobel ceremony is still fresh, yet here he was, ignored, dismissed, humiliated. Flight attendant, smirking. Sir, I think you're in the wrong section. Malcolm exhaled slowly. Malcolm. No, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The attendant's eyes flickered, her smirk unwavering. Around him, silence. Some passengers averted their gaze, others watched, waiting. The wait was the same as it had always been. The fight, unchanged. Because no matter how high he climbed, the world still tried to pull him back down. Malcolm took a slow breath, forcing a calm he had perfected over the years. Excuse me, miss, he said evenly, keeping his voice measured. Could I please have a glass of water? Linda barely acknowledged him, her gaze sweeping past as if he hadn't spoken. Instead, she turned to the passenger across the aisle, flashing a bright, effortless smile. Malcolm exhaled, suppressing the familiar frustration rising in his chest. He had learned long ago that reacting too quickly never worked in his favor. Maybe she was just busy, distracted. He gave it a moment, then tried again. Ma'am, I believe you may have missed me earlier. Could I get some water when you have a moment? Linda finally turned, her expression unreadable. We're serving first-class passengers first, sir. Her tone was clipped, dismissive. I am in first class, Malcolm replied, his voice steady. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Then, without another word, she moved on. Malcolm watched as Linda continued down the aisle, effortlessly responding to every other passenger's request. Each sir and ma'am dripped with forced politeness, but when she glanced his way, her eyes held something else. An irritation she wasn't even trying to hide. He had seen it before, the hesitation, the barely concealed skepticism, the way her voice tightened when she spoke to him. Not outright hostility, but something more insidious. A quiet dismissal, a refusal to acknowledge his presence with the same respect she offered others. A businessman across the aisle requested a refill of his drink. Linda responded with a smile, bending slightly as she handed him the glass. But when Malcolm shifted in his seat, she straightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. Just a moment, sir, she said coolly, her tone lacking the warmth she had given the others. The words were neutral. The message wasn't. Malcolm was patient, but he wasn't invisible. He wasn't about to let this slide. Miss Carter. He addressed her directly this time, his voice unwavering. I asked for a glass of water a while ago. Could you please bring it now? Linda sighed, the sound exaggerated. She turned, grabbed a plastic cup, filled it halfway, and placed it in front of him with a sharp clack. Water sloshed over the rim, spilling onto the tray. She didn't apologize. Happy now? Her smirk was slight but unmistakable. Malcolm stared at the cup, then back at her. The weight of 1,000 past moments pressed against his chest. The subtle insults, the patronizing smirks, the unspoken belief that he didn't belong. He had spent a lifetime proving people wrong. But no matter how many degrees he earned, how many lives he saved, moments like this reminded him that, to some, he would always be less. The cabin had grown quieter. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, their gazes flickering toward the scene but never settling. A man in a navy suit stole a glance before looking back at his laptop. A woman, 2 rows ahead, tightened her grip on her book, pretending not to hear. Malcolm could feel the judgment, not toward Linda, but toward him. A silent expectation lingered in the air. Don't make a scene, just let it go. The weight of inaction was heavier than the insult itself. Not one person spoke up, though the injustice was clear. It always was. Before Malcolm could decide his next move, a voice broke through the tension. Is there a problem here? Flight Supervisor Greg Thompson had arrived. Tall, authoritative, a badge gleaming on his crisp uniform. His expression was neutral, carefully so. I requested water, Malcolm explained, keeping his tone professional. And it seems there was an issue with fulfilling that request. Greg's eyes flicked toward Linda, who stood with her arms crossed, her expression carefully composed. Is that true, Linda? Linda's voice was laced with forced patience. There was a misunderstanding. The passenger became agitated, so I brought him his water. Agitated. Malcolm's jaw tightened. The word carried weight, a suggestion, a warning. Greg turned back to him. Sir, I understand your concern. If there was a service issue, I apologize. But let's try to keep things calm, all right? The practiced neutrality in Greg's voice made Malcolm's stomach turn. This wasn't an apology. This was a warning, a subtle shift of blame. He wasn't the one who had caused the problem, but somehow he was the one being told to stay calm. The injustice was clear, and yet, just like always, it was being smoothed over, repackaged into something palatable for those who refused to see it for what it truly was. Linda's voice cuts through the cabin, sharp and deliberate. I don't feel safe, she exclaims, stepping back as if Malcolm had made a sudden move. Gasps ripple through the passengers and eyes dart toward them. Malcolm remains seated, his voice measured. I haven't done anything to make you feel unsafe, he says, his hands resting on the armrests. But Linda isn't listening, or maybe she is, and that's the problem. She shakes her head, her face painted with exaggerated distress. You're raising your voice at me. He isn't. He knows he isn't, but it doesn't matter. The label she just placed on him is louder than anything he could say. The murmurs spread. A middle-aged man in the next row frowns. A young woman bites her lip, shifting uncomfortably. Fear has been planted, and its roots spread fast. Phones come out. A teenager 2 rows back is recording. Malcolm catches glimpses of his own reflection in the dark screens. A man surrounded, under scrutiny. His breathing slows, controlled. This moment will be judged by millions if the video spreads. A woman in a business suit leans to whisper to her neighbor. Did you see what happened? I don't know, the man responds. But he seems upset. Seems. That's all it takes. Malcolm feels the weight of assumptions pressing down. Some passengers shift uncomfortably, but no one speaks for him. Even those who know better stay silent, as if waiting to see how the scene will play out before choosing a side. Linda crosses her arms, her breath heavy, as if she's the victim of something unbearable. And then, footsteps approach. Flight Supervisor Greg Thompson stands over Malcolm, his expression unreadable. Sir, we need to keep this flight calm. I've been calm, Malcolm replies, voice steady. Greg sighs. This isn't the time to argue. His voice is neutral, practiced, but there's an edge beneath it. I'm not arguing, Malcolm says. I'm just asking to be treated fairly. Greg nods slowly, as if considering, but his next words are rehearsed. One more outburst and we'll have to detain you when we land." The words are a cage snapping shut. Malcolm blinks, absorbing the reality of it. The message is clear. Stay silent, or face the consequences. Linda, standing just a step away, hides a smirk. She's already won. Malcolm exhales slowly, his grip tightening on the armrests. His accomplishments, his titles, his entire life's work, none of it matters at this moment. To them, he is just a man who has made them uncomfortable. The injustice burns, but he swallows it, because he knows how this ends if he doesn't. Greg lingers, watching for any sign of resistance, but Malcolm only nods, his jaw clenched. "Good choice," Greg mutters before walking away. Linda turns, satisfied, and resumes her duties as if nothing happened. The plane hums with awkward silence. The passengers settle, some looking away, others stealing guilty glances. The moment will be forgotten by most of them by the time they land. But Malcolm will carry it long after the wheels touch the ground. The tension in the cabin was suffocating. Malcolm sat stiffly, his fingers pressed against his knee, willing himself to stay composed. Then a voice broke through the murmurs. "Wait a minute. Is that Dr. Malcolm Hayes?" The voice belonged to David Sinclair, a well-dressed businessman in first class. Heads turned. Linda's smirk faltered. Malcolm looked up, weary. "Yes, that's me." Sinclair frowned, shaking his head in disbelief. "The Nobel laureate? The man who revolutionized cancer research?" Passengers exchanged confused glances. Whispers spread like wildfire. The narrative was shifting. "Dr. Hayes? No way," someone muttered. A woman pulled out her phone, typing quickly. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Skepticism replaced silence. Linda stiffened, sensing the change in atmosphere. A young man in the aisle seat tapped furiously on his phone. Within seconds, he gasped, eyes widening. "Oh my God, he's right. Dr. Malcolm Hayes, Nobel Prize-winner, humanitarian, professor at Harvard, it's all here." The murmurs intensified. Screens lit up across the cabin as passengers searched his name. A woman in row 6 leaned forward. "I read about his work last year. He's a pioneer in medical research." Linda's jaw clenched. The authority she had commanded moments ago was slipping away. The disdain she had so confidently wielded was now replaced by uncertainty. Greg Thompson, the flight supervisor, hesitated. "Sir, I didn't," Linda stammered, but the weight of the revelation silenced her. Malcolm remained quiet, his dignity intact. Linda's face paled. I didn't know who he was," she said quickly, her voice lacking the sharpness it had held before. "It was a misunderstanding." A middle-aged woman scoffed. "A misunderstanding? You accused him of being aggressive. You called for security. Now that he's famous, it's a mistake." Linda's breath hitched. "I didn't mean what?" Another voice demanded. "To assume the worst about him, or to get caught?" Malcolm said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence was deafening, heavier than before, but this time it wasn't pressing down on him. It was crushing Linda. Greg shifted awkwardly. "Miss Carter, perhaps we should—" "No, I just—" Linda glanced around desperately. The eyes on her now weren't filled with support. They were filled with disappointment, some with disgust. A woman in the back raised her voice. "This isn't just about Dr. Hayes. If he were any other black man, would we even be questioning this?" Passengers nodded. The air was thick, not with tension, but with accountability. Linda's hands trembled. "I didn't mean to—" David Sinclair cut her off, his voice cool but piercing. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" Silence. The weight of the moment settled over everyone. For the first time, Linda had nothing to say. The hum of the plane is overshadowed by the relentless pings of notifications. Passengers, still processing what they witnessed, watch their phone screens as the video spreads like wildfire. A clip of Linda's accusations, her exaggerated fear, and the airline's dismissive response circulates on social media. Comments pour in, "This is unacceptable." Racial profiling at its worst. We need accountability now. By the time the plane begins its descent, news outlets have already picked up the story. A trending hashtag emerges, calling for justice. Malcolm remains quiet, aware of the storm brewing beyond the cabin walls. Linda, now pale and visibly shaken, clutches her phone, scrolling through an endless barrage of outrage. The very public she sought sympathy from has turned against her. The moment the plane lands, airline officials are waiting. A stern-looking supervisor steps forward as Linda tries to slip past unnoticed. "Miss Hart, please come with us." Her breath catches. "What? The man's expression remains firm. "We've reviewed the situation. Your actions have violated our conduct policies. You are suspended, effective immediately." Passengers murmur in approval as Linda is escorted away. Meanwhile, a spokesperson steps forward, addressing Malcolm directly. "Dr. Hayes, on behalf of the airline, we deeply regret this incident. We take discrimination seriously and will be conducting a full review." The words are carefully rehearsed. Malcolm simply nods, his silence heavier than any response he could give. The cameras flash, capturing every second. The terminal is buzzing, filled with whispers and stolen glances as Malcolm steps out. Despite everything, his posture remains strong, his stride steady. He refuses to be reduced to a victim. He refuses to let Linda's fear define him. A young man rushes up. "Dr. Hayes, I just want to say, I saw the video, what happened was wrong, and I respect how you handled it." Malcolm offers a small nod. "Appreciate that." He keeps walking, the weight of history and expectation pressing down on him. But he carries it the same way he always has, with dignity. A reporter pushes through the crowd, microphone extended. "Dr. Hayes, do you have any comment on what happened today?" He exhales slowly, choosing his words. "What happened to me is not new, it's not rare, but what we do about it, that's what matters." The reporter leans in. "And what should we do?" Malcolm meets her gaze. "Stop letting silence be the answer." The clip will be played millions of times, analyzed, debated. But for Malcolm, the message is simple. Awareness is not enough. Action must follow. And with that, he walks away, leaving the world to decide its next move. What would you have done if you were on that flight? Would you have spoken up or stayed silent? The words linger as the screen fades. Have you ever witnessed injustice like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. This story isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. Your voice matters. Comment below, and let's have an open discussion on racism, privilege, and the power of standing up. Every share sparks a conversation. Every comment challenges a perspective. Be part of the movement. Spread this story and keep the discussion alive. Change begins with awareness. Let's make it happen.